All right, welcome into the Boston Sports Beat. John Zannis alongside Greg Bedard. We're going to start things off with some football. And Greg, what the F, man? Everyone wakes up to today, just a normal day, right? You're riding high off a Red Sox victory. Everyone's feeling pretty good. And boom, Patriots to release Stephon Gilmore. Didn't end up being a release. He ended up being traded to Carolina for a 6th-round pick. But what a freaking disaster this situation is. Recapping for everybody at home. He's on the pup. You expect he's coming back, working on a possible contract extension. Who knows? But you're expecting at some point or another, you're going to have your number one corner back on the field playing out the season, and instead gone for virtually nothing.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of us were trying to sleep this morning after being at Fenway Park very late last night on top of the Sunday night football game. Yeah. And then all of a sudden I'm getting texts from you at 9:30, 9:30 being like, we need to talk about Gilmore. I'm like, what? And then I looked at my phone and I had a text from a very plugged in NFL source who was actually involved in these negotiations and just straight out told me hearing Gilmore's going to Green Bay. So, I mean, we could talk about the mechanics of the deal, but just overall, this is just a complete disaster.
How did it get here? Right. It's
a
no
disaster.
One cares about the deal. How in the world does Bill Belichick get here with this player at this time? Not only getting no return, but not doing something earlier, last year's trade deadline, whenever. I know the injury complicated things, but this is an absolutely blown asset. You get nothing in return, and you don't get the services of the player who is still one of the best players in his position.
It's John, how did we get here? It's another in a long line of Bill Belichick being way, way, way too late than too early. He got to be the best in the business because he was too early on everything.
Sure.
He saw everything ahead of time. Now he's behind. I mean, you go back to Joe Thuney. Joe Thuney was a guy that I was warning for years. You need to take care of him or you need to trade him or else you're not going to get anything. They let Joe Thuney walk and Tom Brady, and he's involved in this too. They let them both walk in the same year that they spend $175 million. So you're not getting any compensatory picks out of either of those deals. You're not even getting comp picks from those. And so, Joe Thuney was way too late. He should have been traded the year before if you knew what was going to happen. Tom Brady, one thing that people don't talk about is the Patriots could have had Tom Brady play his final season under his deal. It was there. It was pennies. It was like $11 million, I think. But they could have made him play for that. Instead, they give him more money. They tack on 2 more dummy years. They add on even more dead cap. And they basically did the same thing almost with Stephon Gilmore. At least now they're letting him play to the end of his deal. But, he's going to play for somebody else under to the end of his deal. And this was Stephon Gilmore. We all know he should have been traded at the trade deadline last year. It was the height of his powers. He was still the reigning defensive player of the year. He was no longer playing that way. We all know he wanted a contract extension, and the Patriots were not going to give it to him. Stephon Gilmore knew the situation, put his house on the market, figured the Patriots aren't idiots. They're going to trade me now. This is when my trade compensation is at the best. And what did they do? They held on to him. He got hurt. Sorry, I don't want to hear any excuse about you couldn't foresee him getting an injury. It's freaking football. It happens. It's part of the calculation. And so he gets hurt. Now you're like, well, now they can't trade him in the offseason. Now what the hell are they going to do? And they just completely screw the pooch. So now they get nothing. They don't, it's just, and now I don't want to, and I also, another thing I don't want to hear is, yeah, well, the secondary did great against Tom, so they don't really need Gilmore. Like, give me a freaking break. If you believe, don't even come in here with that stuff. Like, so what? Let alone that how thin they are right now. Like, okay, maybe they could piece things together right now. What happens if J.C. Jackson gets hurt? What now? Jalen Mills, Sean Wade, this new guy that they signed to the practice squad? Like, give me a break. They are in dire straits. They are a worse team today because they don't have Stephon Gilmore, and they got Bupkis to show for it.
And that's the thing is, why make excuses for this? Fine, they played okay against Tampa, and given the circumstances, there really was no market for Gilmore. But that's why you trade him early. Like, that's the job. So what I don't get here is, a lot of people assume that the coach / GM is above reproach with all of his personnel decisions, and Bill knows best and this and that, but there's no accountability or transparency with decisions like this. Who's going to question him on it? You think Kraft's going to knock on the door and be like, "Hey, Bill, so what happened there?" Right. It just kind of happens and you move on. But the thing, and again, I don't know of all the reports or whatever it is we fully believe, the fact that it sounds like Gilmore is going to play under his current contract in Carolina when the assumption was he wasn't going to play here until he got a raise starts to make you think he just wasn't playing for this team and this guy here.
Let me explain that. Let me explain all of it. And because I have very good sourcing on this whole thing. And so this is how it went down. So the Patriots yesterday started to make some calls to some friendly people that, hey, you want Gilmore? What will you give? No takers. The Patriots I don't know what they were asking for, but it was a very high bar. So this morning, they got no takers. This morning, they decided to open up the bidding. That's why you leaked the news that you're going to release him at 8 o'clock in the morning, because you have until 4 o'clock. The Patriots thought, so they got some calls, maybe talk some parameters, but the Patriots still had a high bar. They were basically bluffing. They thought somebody was going to get desperate, that somebody else was going to jump in ahead of them, and they would get decent compensation, probably around the 3 to 4 range. Didn't happen. The clock was ticking. The Patriots knew it, and so they basically went back to a team that they had heard from early on in Carolina, and they took what Carolina's offer, which was a 6th-round pick. As far as I know, and this is going off of league sources who were involved in this, they think that was the only offer that the Patriots got on Stephon Gilmore. So the Patriots tried to bluff their way to more compensation. It didn't happen. Now, on Gilmore, I am told from an excellent source on this, again, involved in these negotiations, because I asked the question too. I was like, well, so is he getting a bump in pay? Is he getting a contract extension? That's the only way that, that he would okay. Well, I mean, Stephon's going back home, but that's a piece that he wanted to, and that's why he wouldn't be here anymore. And they're like, nope, no bump, no contract extension. And I was told, as far as they knew, Stephon Gilmore was open to the same sort of scenario with the Patriots, which basically the Panthers have said, yeah, if things go well, we'll be interested in talking a contract extension with you in the offseason. Gilmore got none of that from the Patriots. The Patriots were not entertaining a contract extension after the season. They basically wanted the half-season rental. They wanted to move on after that. Gilmore was not interested in that. He wouldn't play ball and renegotiate his contract to give them more cap space. And so there you have the trade.
But just that, again, is more infuriating if you're a Patriots fan, which is
it's damning to the Patriots. Which he's playing under the same contract. He's doing it for somebody else.
Same thing, just not here. And that's the biggest kick in the, of all of it. If it's an untenable situation or there's a reason you have to do it for X, Y, and Z, this did not have to happen. So this one's going to be really hard to swallow. And how many of these types of situations that you've listed, a whole bunch of them earlier, can they continue to have with not just players, like their best players, where you're losing the player and you're getting nothing, and it's all based on no give and take, hardline stances, interpersonal skills? I have no idea, but it's just shocking that it gets to this point.
And John, let's take it a step further. They're still screwed at the cornerback position.
Sure, because you got to find that money and pay somebody. You got to pay JC.
Now, well, I mean, who knows? They don't even have all that much money next year because of what they did this year.
Sure.
And who knows? Maybe some of the free agents don't even work out, and they try to cut bait and they incur more dead cap. Whatever. But just putting that aside, so Stephon Gilmore's gone. You figured at the worst, the Patriots could go to the end of this and threaten to either tag Stephon Gilmore or J.C. Jackson after the season to give them assure themselves of one franchise cornerback. And you figured it would be J.C. Jackson. He's younger. Let Stephon move on, what have you. Now Stephon's gone. Now J.C. Jackson has all the leverage. Now the Patriots have no choice but to franchise him. If you're J.C. Jackson's agent, and I looked at the projected cap number, the projected franchise tag for cornerback next year is almost $18 million. Okay? So if and say the Patriots play this out, because this is what the teams do, this is what the agents do. So $18 million for year one. If the Patriots don't want to lose that asset, they're going to have to tag them again. That's $22 million in the second year. So that's basically, let's call it $40 million. Yeah, $40 million for 2 years for J.C. Jackson. If I am his agent and the Patriots come to me on a contract extension, that is where I start.
Right.
$40 million guaranteed the first 2 years, because that's the corner that they have painted themselves into. And so they continue to be screwed at the cornerback position. There are no other cornerbacks in the pipeline. That's probably why they traded for Shaun Wade from the Ravens. We don't even know whether he can play. He has not been active yet, but that's where they are. They paint themselves in the corner, and they don't have a number. John, I was excited. One of the things I was optimistic about at 1-3 was, okay, if they can go through this, whatever, then they get Stephon Gilmore back. All right. Now you add in Jamie Collins. He'll help a little bit. Okay. And the guys are getting better. Now I can see it. Now, no Stephon Gilmore in week 7 or 8. Dude, that's not good. It's not good at all.
No, this is a massive step back in a lot of ways. And again, just head scratching. I all day long, it hasn't gotten any better or any clearer or just a botch, just a miss. I don't know. You said it 100 different ways, so I don't know how else to put it here.
John, one thing I just wanted to explain, because I'm sure people were following my tweets today.
Yeah.
And early on, I said I'd be shocked if Gilmore wasn't traded. This is after
I was following that, and then they lost the
Schefter said
leverage.
he's gonna be released. I said he's shocked. I'd be shocked that if he wasn't traded, which he was. And I said that the favorites in league circles was the Packers. So just to explain that, along with the whole scenario that I laid out before. So let's just say, for hypothetical reasons, you're a team that's interested in acquiring a cornerback like Stephon Gilmore. So you call the Patriots are asking for the moon, say a 3rd round pick. And they're like, screw that. We'll just wait till he's released. You call the agent. You're like, we're not paying what Bill wants. Like, that's not happening. So how are we looking if this does ultimately be a release, that they don't get any takers on their offer? And the agent was telling people, we're going to Green Bay. Green Bay is looking good, so I wouldn't waste yourself. So that's where it was. And the Packers did not want to step up and make a deal. The Panthers were the only team that made a deal. For Stephon Gilmore, it made sense. He's going home, basically, at least for the balance of this season. And so that's how we ended up where we were. So I just wanted to.
Yeah. It just seems silly that Green Bay wouldn't step up in terms of.
Yes, it does.
Such meager compensation. All right, switching gears to baseball, where the Red Sox should have been the lead story today, but the Patriots always have to step in and steal some thunder, Sean. But hey, look. They did it. All of the concern, everything that we had spoken about, talked about leading up here. Red Sox took care of business at home against the Yankees in a 1-game wild card in a very fun environment, which you were there and got to take in. And honestly, a relatively breezy game for them. They get out to an early lead. Evaldi's lights out. They make a key defensive play. And the Yankees didn't really put up a ton of fight. Were you surprised how this game went?
Yeah, I thought this was going to be a more competitive game, maybe very much in doubt going down to the last 3 or 6 outs, and that wasn't the case. From the Bogarts home run in the first, they took the lead. They never trailed most of the night. Their lead was a multi-run lead, so you had built in a little comfort factor there. If Alex Cora had attempted to draw up how he wanted the night to go, I suspect it would have looked very much like what we saw.
Yeah, I'd say the one thing for sure, maybe not having to get quite so many outs from your bullpen, but to their credit, 3 2/3 innings, and they acquitted themselves incredibly well. It looked like Eovaldi was going to get them through 6, possibly even 7, the way he was throwing. But other than that, yeah, I mean, just such a clean game by the Red Sox, which really obviously bodes well moving forward. Now, taking on the Rays, the series starts Thursday. You'll be heading out there to cover it for Boston Sports Journal. And again, for those of you out there watching or listening who don't subscribe. $3.99, $39.99 a year, $5.99 a month, 11 cents a day. Best Boston sports coverage in town, bar none. Now, quick preview of this series. The Rays have been not quite wire to wire, but I think a strong argument can be made the most complete team and possibly the best all-around team in baseball for most of the year. These guys don't do a lot wrong. And so the Red Sox are really going to have to be perfect.
Yeah, we talked about the margin for error not being great in the postseason. I think that's even more the case here, John, because as you noted, Tampa Bay is a team that doesn't make mistakes. They're fundamentally sound. They're athletic. They're versatile. They can move guys around. They have, they're probably going to end up starting 3 rookies. I mean, starting their first 3 starting pitchers could be rookies,
which is unreal. Yeah.
Their pitching depth, the ability to tag team guys out of the bullpen, use openers, use bulk guys, whatever it takes. But more than that, they're very fundamentally sound. They convert balls into outs. They take the extra base. They're aggressive without being too aggressive. So if the margin wasn't great against the Yankees, it's even slimmer here against Tampa Bay.
Yeah, and the Red Sox have question marks as well. Obviously, JD Martinez, we're not really sure what's going to happen there. He was so bad, he couldn't even suit up to be on the bench as an available pinch hitter in the wild card game. You have to wonder whether he's going to be able to be on that roster. That would really kind of move things around for the Red Sox a good bit.
Yeah, in one sense, it makes it a little easier.
Makes it easier.
You essentially roll out that lineup that you had last night with Dahlbeck at first, Schwarber as the DH, and then Verdugo in left field. But obviously, you would prefer to have Martinez and his bat available. I noted that when he came out for pregame introductions in uniform, he did not even lightly jog. He walked. And prior to the game, Alex Cora described Martinez's ankle as, quote, humongous in terms of the swelling that had taken place there. That doesn't sound to me like a guy who's a slam dunk for the next round. And, remember the problems you run into if you roll the dice, bring a guy onto the roster, and then lose him a game or 2 in. You can replace him, but you lose that player for the next round too. Right. You don't want to get too far ahead of yourself, but maybe if they think, well, we can get by this round and then he'll truly be 100% or close to it for the ALCS. I thought it was a fait accompli that he'd be ready for the division series, but not after hearing Alex Cora talk yesterday and not after seeing JD Martinez walk very gingerly.
Yeah, I guess you could play that scenario in reverse, which is to put somebody on the roster that you don't think you would have or need for the ALCS and theoretically replace them with an injury.
Baseball guards against that. You have to document injuries and, that would be a big red flag that everyone would be paying attention to.
Alex Cora would never allow himself to do anything.
No precedent for that whatsoever.
So if you have to handicap it just the way it looks now, I think a lot of people are going to look at this Red Sox season just based off of expectations and where they'd been in the last couple of years and already chalk it up as a victory. So I don't think there's a ton of pressure here. You're playing arguably the best team in baseball, and you were able to get through the Yankees, which is a fun little treat for Sox fans. So you have that. So I don't think there's a ton of pressure here, but what are the chances they can actually sneak by Tampa off into and head off into the ALCS?
Well, I'll say this. It's better that they're catching them in a 5-game series rather than a 7, because the shorter the series, the more likely a flukier outcome. And by fluky, I mean the underdog winning. I don't think it would be a complete fluke if the Red Sox were to win this series, but I also think most people expect the Rays will. But the fact that it's 5 and not 7, makes it maybe a smaller mountain to climb. I would expect that Tampa wins, but I could certainly see it going 5 games. I could certainly see the Red Sox forcing Game 5 back at Tropicana Field and a pretty competitive series. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. The Red Sox proved in the first half of the year that they can play with Tampa. I think they won the first 5 games of the series and then didn't do as well as the season moved on, and the Rays kind of picked up a little steam. The Red Sox slumped in the second half, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that they could pull off an upset. But if you're asking me, I'd say Rays in 5.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Well, Sean McAdam, as I said, is heading down to Tampa to cover the game. He'll have all of the coverage. The series starts on Thursday night. We'll try to talk once again here on this show on Friday, recapping Game 1, and we'll see where the Red Sox stand after that. Sean, thanks a lot.
Thanks, John.
All right, switching gears to hockey, let's bring in Conor Ryan. And Conor, we've got a goalie controversy of sorts with the Boston Bruins, an actual legitimate competition between the presumed starter Linus Ullmark and the kid Jeremy Swayman for who's going to be the number one heading into their exhibition game tonight. We're looking at Ullmark starting, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's got the job locked down.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if anything, this final preseason game is going to be his maybe best shot at holding on to that number one spot. If you asked me at the start of training camp who's going to get the number one nod, I would have easily said Ullmark. I mean, as much as Swayman, as promising as he looked down the stretch last year, Ullmark's a veteran. You handed him $20 million. Makes a lot of sense he'd get the starting nod. But I mean, Bruce Cassidy said it himself that if you look at just the baseline numbers, Swayman's been much better. You know, he's been cutting down on rebound issues. His lateral movement's been great. Ullmark hasn't exactly been that. And it's not just, that OT kind of mess up he had in that game against the Rangers. It's just some of the other things, the basic eye test of the rebounds and, not sealing off the posts, little things like that, that when you weigh it compared to Swayman, I think the rookie has the edge right now. Now, of course, is this the end of the world if Swayman bumps him for a start? No, it's kind of like the opening day starting pitcher in baseball, right? Like it's more of just like an honorary title. You want the veteran to have it, but what matters more is who's starting in the playoffs. And if Swayman right now gets the opening nod, doesn't mean that's going to be what it's going to be when you get to the postseason.
Sure, and yes, it might be ceremonial and who starts game 1, but ultimately you have an alpha usually in goaltending tandems. There's very few teams that operate with an even split. So right now the question is, who is your alpha? Who is the big game goalie? Who's the guy who would play the 60-40 split or the 65-35 split, even if you did want to share reps or you felt confident in both? And let's say there's not a ton of separation. Sure, you can ride hot hands or you can basically, come close to an even split, but usually somebody emerges. And again, throw out the contract and all of that stuff. Eye test alone from last year all the way to, eye test alone, there are many people who thought Swayman should have played ahead of Tuukka last year. The kid looks that good. So again, throw out everything that which is rookie and unproven. This guy makes a lot of money, and we brought him in to be the starter. Eye test alone, who do you put between the pipes?
Yeah, I think if you look at just eye test, you have to go with Swayman right now based on the way he's playing. And as much as I think we've talked about all through the summer of, being aware that a guy like Swayman as a rookie, he's going to hit some bumps along the road. I think it's still proactive to expect that, but has he hit any yet? Right? Like at one point, maybe it's about giving him that number one chance and kind of letting him run with it until he hits those bumps along the road, which if they do happen, which I think we still expect, you have another potential number one Ullmark there that's going to be able to help him out and get those reps in case he needs a little bit of a break. But right now, you haven't really seen any warning signs, anything like that in Swayman's game at all since he's made that jump up to the pro.
Not just that. In fact, he looks so remarkably poised and calm that, there's nothing rookie or shaky about his play. He's very smooth. A lot of the stuff almost looks effortless. He plays, just his lateral movement, a lot of what he does. It just doesn't look like somebody who's flipping out back there or freaking out or too big for the moment. Now, you mentioned the money. It's a big deal, especially if you're Don Sweeney. And I wonder whether there's any pressure there, which is, I kind of paid this guy to be the starter. So you kind of got to, if it's close, you kind of got to make him the starter, Butchie, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely plays into it. That's why Cassidy at the start of camp, said Omar's the veteran, but you can kind
Yeah.
of read between the lines of like, oh, we're also paying this guy almost 5 million more than we're paying Swayman this year, and the optics do play into that, which I think you can get away with it a lot more when it's something as relatively inconsequential as like an opening night starter. But again, it's still, if you look at just the basic eye test, that has to be another thing you have to factor in heavily, because who gives you the best chance to start off strong? Right now, it looks like Swayman. I mean,
Yeah.
he doesn't look like he's taken a step back at all from what you saw from last year, which, as a rookie, as a guy who you imagine teams already are getting the book on him, getting more film, that he hasn't really taken a step back at all.
No.
Pretty impressive. I mean, he's a very, very talented prospect.
He's really talented, and that's the thing. I think people almost undersell that because he was, not a super high draft pick, and he doesn't have that blue chip pedigree. But everything about him just screams starting goaltender. So again, I don't like to do this all the time, but let's play the what if game. What if Swayman is your starting 3 out of every 4 game starter throughout the season because he outplays Ullmark? Great. You've got the better player between the pipes, but then you start to look back and say, did we need to? Because that was the thing this offseason. If Tuukka wasn't coming back or was in the pipeline ready to come back cheaply when he's healed later on in the year, why did you go spend a lot? It was a head scratching move for some at the time. Why did you spend all this money? You could have finally not paid premium price, 7 million plus for a goalie. I mean, granted, Ullmark's not that, he's 5, but you could have gotten away with paying what you're paying Swayman and had all this money to play with elsewhere. They went with goalie, not again, not exactly where people thought that money would necessarily go. Forget whether it's 3 out of 4 or whatever. If it was close enough where you're really scratching your head thinking who should be the guy, I can't understand that move at all. I
Yeah,
didn't
no,
understand it then. It's not just a hindsight play. I didn't believe Ullmark was going to be so head and shoulders above Swayman that it justified the spend at the time.
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think you look at the risk of, let's say you went with Swayman, you went all in the youth movement and had Swayman and Dan Vladar. Like that is very, very risky for a team hoping to make another deep cup run, to hope that Swayman pans out and Vladar is a capable backup. But as you say, you didn't have to sign a guy like Ullmark if, pick the plenty of, 33 plus year old veterans who would be willing to sign on a 1 or 2 year deal. Like that very well could have been an option. So, from the Bruins, it's one, not expecting maybe Swayman to take this step forward. I mean, I feel like when we talk about Swayman, I'm still going to have that cautious outlook. Like we're going to be talking in November, and he's going to be like 9-1 with like a 1 goals against. I'm still going to be like, well, you still got to wait. Like maybe I'm just being way too cautious. Maybe that's how the Bruins are thinking. But again, you look at how the money's allocated and the fact that they're probably going to have to use some of that cap room later in the year to address whether it's
Yep.
strength down the middle and other defensemen. You have a guy like Ullmark, and let's say he's again the number 2 guy, he's getting 35% of the reps and the 5 million on the books. Kind of tough, kind of a tough
Yeah,
look.
it is kind of tough. And I always felt if the Swayman Vladar thing wasn't working out, sure. Can you flip somebody like a Zaboral to get somebody else's veteran backup goaltender, or look for a
Mhm.
situation where you might be able to get something that another team doesn't necessarily need cheaply? You might be able to do that as well. So it is what it is. We'll see how it plays out. But a big start for Ullmark for sure. And I don't think the story's going away for a little bit. The other story, we can't quit it no matter how hard we try. Jack Studnicka, we've talked about him basically every time you and I get together. So, okay, sure, he didn't stick as the number 2 guy. I don't think people fully expected it. Coyle is back, and he's the 2C right now. But it looks like Studnicka is a man without a home, and the line rushes that they're throwing out heading into the game on Wednesday night pretty much looks like your opening night lineup, and Studnicka's not on it.
Yeah, no, he seems like he's kind of the odd man out, and whether that's the fact that he's exempt from waivers, so you can send him down to Providence with no worries about a team picking him up. Uh, all in all, though, it's still a tough break for a guy that when we've talked about that, even though he wasn't going to, let's say, supplant Charlie Coyle as the 2C, or he wasn't going to bump out a guy like Eric Howlett down the middle, you'd think he still would have value in, even if it's a 4th line role to start, whether, that's all Bruce Cassidy talked about in all these post game interviews about him, that, look the pot, 200-foot game, uh, you know, exceeded at the smaller details of the game that sometimes are overlooked in these younger players. Sounds like a guy that if you plugged him in on a 4th line, that we've said before, other than Thomas Nosek, hasn't really had a lot of standout performers. Maybe you have something there, but from the Bruins' perspective is whether it's they want to keep him down the middle or they think that top 6 reps in the AHL are more valuable than 9-10 minutes a night in the NHL. That's what they value. But you look at kind of the body of the work and what else he had to do. I mean, did he have to drop 10 points in 4 games to
Right.
make a spot on the team? Like it's a tough break for a guy that, even from the coaching perspective, seemed like they were impressed by what he showed.
And look, sometimes there just isn't a job opening, and in the case of Studnicka, it appears there wasn't. So he wasn't really competing as much as he was just showing that, like, hey, I'm ready if you need me. The what I don't love about it, even if it makes sense in all the ways you mentioned, is you have situations where you put somebody into a spot when they're not necessarily ready, and that could hurt their confidence. And you're always worried about doing that. But I think the reverse, the inverse can be true here, where you have a guy who's done everything possible and deserves a shot, and you want to reward that performance. And instead, it's sorry, but we're sending you down. You wonder what kind of negative or adverse effect that could have on a person who you wanted to see show up and play exactly like this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other prospects have talked about that, and something Brad Marchand alluded to, the fact that sometimes it's discouraging when you're a guy like, even let's say a Jakob Lauko, who had a pretty solid camp, that he looks at the depth chart, and even though he's putting together good shifts in a preseason game, looks at the lineup in front of him like, how am I going to crack this group when you've got legit NHLers all over the place? I mean, it has to be discouraging for these guys. And the Bruins preach, internal competition and the value of that, but at one point, like, how much do you need a guy to succeed down the AHL? Do you need them to
Right.
be like all pro players? Like sometimes you just need a guy who gets an opportunity and they run with it. I mean, look at like Mo Lewis and Tom Brady in that situation. Not to
Sure.
compare that Jakob Lauko is going to be that, but sometimes you just need a break to get that spot. And sometimes guys look better up in the NHL than they do in the AHL. It doesn't
Exactly.
happen all the time, but
Yeah.
sometimes you just need that shot. And that hasn't really been afforded based on what this lineup is.
You need it. For some reason, you're right. Some people need to play up. I'm going to cross sports reference, but I remember this happened to Clay Buchholz soon after the Sox brought him up. Back when he was a rookie proving himself. He obviously had the no-hitter early in his career, but in the next year, he's down in the minors, and he has a quote where he's like, "I'm wasting bullets down here." And so that's what you kind of feel like if you're somebody who thinks you're at this level right now. Like, I'm wasting bullets down here. I'm not getting better. This is the place where I need to make my due. And some people perform up rather than down, to their competition. So we'll see what happens. I mean, look, this is a game. There's no way the opening night lineup is the lineup that stays all season long. There's injuries. There's a lot of other things. He'll get his shot at some point or another. Hopefully he plays as well when he does as he did kind of here at the start of camp. So Connor, I just want to say thanks.